any of you all are interested in learning a little bit more about College Greenlight, or you want a team training, please type training in the chat box provided in the GoToWebinar platform, or you can contact us at info@collegegreenlight.com. Well, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and transition over to our lovely presenters. We have Tamara Siler and Taren Smith, who are both the Deputy Director of Admissions at Rice University. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and leave it up to you all. And you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay, so this is Taren. Can everyone hear me? I hope so. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. And I just want to say thank you all for joining us today. As Brittany started with, it's a very busy season. We're just about a week or so out from kind of accepting offers of admission for any of your college-bound seniors, but we know that you have a lot of other things on your plate right now with wrapping up the traditional school year. So thank you for taking some time out to learn a little bit more about committee-based evaluation from Tamara and I.
And yes, and I'm Tamara Siler, and I echo Taren's comment, and we look forward to giving you more information. Again, we are both Deputy Directors of Admission. Taren specializes in university engagement, and I specialize in access and inclusion. And so we felt it would be fitting for both of us to sort of do this presentation for you today, and we hope that we have some great information to share.
So I'll go ahead and get started. This is Taren again. Before we jump into the topic at hand of committee-based evaluation, just want to share a few things about Rice University specifically. If you don't know too much about us, just some basic information. We're located in Houston, Texas, which is the 4th largest city in the country and the most diverse city in the country as well, which is such an integral part of the student's experience here. We were founded by William Marsh Rice and opened our doors in 1912. We've always had an emphasis on undergraduate education. We currently serve about 3,900 undergraduates here on campus. We do certainly have graduate students as well, but this is a very collaborative student body, which is something that we're continually recognized for. Our student body allows us to have, a small student to faculty ratio, which is 6 to 1, and more than 70% of our students have, or 70% of our classes have 20 or fewer students in them. So students who are looking for a smaller campus life, we might be able to serve that. We also have an emphasis on experiential learning, research, internships. All of these opportunities feed into the academic experience that a student is going to have here. Academically, we have programs in the social sciences and humanities, also natural sciences and engineering, as well as architecture and music. We do have a graduate school of business as well, and our undergraduates are actually able to take advantage of some opportunities within that graduate program. Beyond incredible academics and hands-on experience, are the heart and soul of a Rice University experience is our residential college system. This is where a student lives and eats. We have 11 of them on campus. They all have their own colors and crests and traditions, and there's a lot of pride that goes into these colleges. We are a school that practices holistic application review. This past year, we reached over 27,000 applications and had an acceptance rate of about 8.7%. And so when you take a look at those numbers, this is definitely a growth in application numbers. And so how do we maintain that growth and evaluate that growth in applications while still giving a fair assessment across the board? Well, that's where CBE, committee-based evaluation, has come in. And so what is committee-based evaluation? So to first understand what this is, it might be helpful to explain what some of the other more traditional reading evaluations are like. So for many years, for as long as colleges and universities have been open and evaluating applications, more often than not, you have two readers looking at a file. One reader will take a look at it, and in the days of paper applications, might be taking hard copy notes and then passing it along to another reader who then does their notes, and then so on and so forth. Even with the advancements of technology, that model was still used. And so if you were on the computer taking notes and then it gets electronically sent off to that second reader, in some cases, there might be decisions made by that first reader. More often than not, a lot of the files would get passed along to that second reader, and then it would feed into a larger committee process. But looking at a singular file by one person could take anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes. It was taking a lot of man hours. And so many schools were seeing increased application pools, and there were just never too many advancements in how applications were evaluated up until about 2013. So about 6 years ago or so, two admission officers at the University of Pennsylvania created a more sustainable holistic evaluation model. So for those schools who administer holistic evaluation approaches, these two counselors came up with the idea of reading a file together. So instead of one person looking at it and then another, those two people are actually looking at it together. And you can see that since this was created in 2013, more and more schools have been adopting CBE because of the benefits of it, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation. So to break it down a little bit more, what is CBE? So again, we're reading in teams. And this means that you have two sets of eyes on the application at all times. And I'll turn it over to Tamara here in just a second to explain what that looks like a little bit more. But this means that no application is acted on by one individual. So you always have two people at the forefront looking at the application together. There's emphasis on dialogue. The team is discussing the merits and analyzing the candidates. And so it's not just one person. This is a team of a seasoned and maybe a new admission counselor. But at the end of the day, it's two people going through a file, which has actually helped increase the efficiency of getting through the quantity of files that many of us have seen an increase in.
Okay, so this is Tamara, and so now I'm going to talk about how that looks like on a practical basis when two people walk in the room. So in essence, we both will have our laptops available to us, and we're both able to look at the file at any given time. The first person, or at least that we're looking at in the first section of the screen, that is what we typically will call our pilot. So the pilot is going to be the territory manager. So they're going to be the ones that are most familiar with the schools. They may, depending on the experience of the pilot, they may already have a good sense of the school profile, but they will have the school profile available to them. So their job is to assess the academic pieces. Because, of course, in any holistic review, the most important part of the review is to look at the academic credentials of the student first. And it's to look at very carefully, is this a student who has taken a certain level of rigor? Is this a student who is a solid performer? Is this a student whose academic rigor is telling us that they're well prepared and aligned with the area of study that they're telling us that they would like to study? So that person their job during that review is to focus on the transcript, the school profile, the guidance council recommendation, and teacher recommendations, of which we require 2 in the process. So And typically what has happened is that that person would still have that job and then would have to turn their attention to sort of the softer pieces of the application. But what CPE facilitates is that while that person's doing their academic evaluation, the co-pilot, the person who's in the room with them, is already taking a look at the personal components, is already starting to look at what the students composed in terms of their application, which includes their essays, which includes their accounting of what they've done with their time outside of class, which includes the short answer questions. If there's an alumni interview, we do not require that students have an interview, but it's certainly recommended, and we will see a significant number of students take advantage of that opportunity. So that would also be within that. And then additional info or other recommendations that were not requested by us, but may have some additional context. So, and this is going to be once everybody's verbalizing at this time. So it's not that this person is sitting over here reading their pieces, and it's not that the personal component person is sitting over and just looking at their pieces. There is constant sort of talking between the two. But it does create a very sort of dynamic environment in which you're getting the quick sense between the two of you. You're explaining what you're seeing in terms of the academics, in terms of what the counselor is saying, in terms of teacher recommendations, and likewise, that person who's in charge of the more subjective pieces of the application, like the personal components, they're talking about what they're seeing in the application, essay, alumni interview, and they're trying to see where that information meshes. So if we go to the next slide, I think that's the importance of the dialogue. So the benefit in having those two people together, rather than having them in the traditional system that Taren explained initially, is that discussion that they would typically have on their own is happening in real time and is happening together, so that they can bounce ideas off of each other in terms of what they're seeing. So they identify resonance across the different components of the evaluation. So, if the student is talking about something in terms of the activities that they're having, then immediately the pilot can turn back to something that was said in the counselor recommendation or something that was said in the teacher recommendation. So you have this active conversation that's going on that creates a certain level of energy around what the student has submitted and says, oh yes, this is exactly what, that I'm seeing on this side of things. Or if you're looking at the academic side, this student looks like they're doing this, what are they saying about it in the application? We are able to identify a case for admission because we're able to say, not only talk about that case as articulated by the student, their level of interest in the institution, but we also talk about, okay, what's the case of their match with the area that they've identified as the one of their greatest interest. We do talk about merits and possible areas that would not be as strong in terms of the overall context of our pool. And so we will say, that's when we might say, well, what sort of impact has the student had? And we talk about, is the student, how are they defined in their school environment? Are they a leader? Are they somebody who does service? But also, if there's anything articulated where we would see perhaps this would be a challenge to their successful transition to the university, if there's a period of time where it seems like the student struggled a bit, or if there are some challenges being clearly articulated by either the student or by their recommenders, that would be a time for us to discuss that as well. And then just in general, just what is the level of strength of the support in the recommendation. The teacher recommendations are really, really important to us to get a sense of the role that the student would play in the classroom. So that dialogue is happening. I think there's been a lot of publicity about the amount of time that is spent on that dialogue. But remember, you have now two individuals looking at the file and bringing their professional experience to the table and having that active discussion and not necessarily, and it also controls for some level of redundancy that the person who would see the file afterwards would have to look over the exact same thing again, and you wouldn't have that activity in the conversation. One thing we do want to stress, though, the team evaluation that we're talking about, that initial phase of evaluation, is just the first phase of evaluation. It is, in some ways, it helps to direct the file to the next level. Now, certainly, there are going to be some files for whom that team discussion might be the ending point for the evaluation. But that's not any different than it would have been in the other type of reading system, is that there are some students that, when you look at everything that's in the file, you just realize that this is probably not going to ever be a file that would be in selective range. And so there's no real reason to continue it. But again, now that conversation is happening between two people, and very often in the old system, that was just happening with one person. If we do deem that there's enough here to move on to a greater discussion, then those discussions also happen in a team format. So at every stage, you have sort of people bouncing their ideas off of each other. So do know that the whole idea behind CBE is that there's always going to be an active conversation about the applicant. So I know there's a lot about what committee-based evaluation is. What we wanted to stress is what it's not. So we truly feel that it is not a reduction in the quality of the read. If anything, this is my 27th year of doing this. And I can tell you I've experienced a lot of different approaches to reading files in that time. And I would say that this is our second year of utilizing CBE, and we really, I think what it does is that it provides a learning platform, because I think we grew by leaps and bounds in terms of our ability to utilize this process from one year to the next. And I am more confident than I've ever been in the quality of the reads that a student got, and that the fact that they were really that the read itself was reinforcing a lot of our training, a lot of our values, a lot of our priorities. All of that was being reinforced because you had two people in the room having that active conversation. Not a reduction in professional time and expertise. And again, the whole idea behind this is that you have somebody who's gone through multiple admission cycles, maybe somebody for whom this is their first admission cycle, but those two people are together in a room. Our access goals, again, I think, we do go through a training process where we lay out those goals. We really talk about our priorities in terms of making sure that we're providing great access to students who come from under-resourced backgrounds, low-income backgrounds. And I think, the fact that there are two people in there, the more likely that somebody's going to say, okay, how does this really fit into some of those priorities that we heard stated in training. And I already mentioned that it's not a final decision for many applicants. It's not isolated to a singular read. And there's no ties to the need-based financial aid process. And this has been true of our admissions approach for as long as I've been here, no matter what it was. But CBE does not change that impact. That financial aid is a process that happens outside of the application reading. So a student's ability to pay, we are very fortunate to be able to meet 100% of demonstrated need, and we've been need blind in our admissions process for all U.S. citizens, permanent residents, DACA, and undocumented students who have been in the U.S. for an extended period of time and will be graduating from a U.S. high school. So yes, I think, now, we do offer merit awards, and so even those will be read in a CBE format. So you'll have several people in the room looking at the file and talking about the merit-based process.
So this is Taren again, and this, a lot of the slides that you're seeing, they were actually presented at NACAC a few years ago, and one of the presenters was actually our Vice President for Enrollment here at Rice, Yvonne Romero da Silva, and she was at Penn when CBE was kind of developed, and so she actually did a lot of research on it as well. And some of the benefits do come from professional development, and this is what we really want to emphasize so that you understand, how it is of a benefit, because we're just strengthening staff and strengthening the quality of the read every cycle that we use CBE. So staff, as Tamara talked about, there's continual staff training. When you have a seasoned reader and a new reader in the room, training is just going to naturally happen. But sometimes maybe you'll have two staff members who have been in the profession around the same time, but you're still learning from one another. It does help with the knowledge of institutional priorities and the mission, and a lot of that can go back to not being in conflict with access goals. That is all put to the forefront because, again, having that at least one seasoned reader in the room who might have a stronger, baseline or knowledge or depth of knowledge of the institutional priorities. So we're ensuring that those priorities are always a part of the conversation, as opposed to, again, maybe one person looking at the file who might not be as familiar with them. It gives you a much broader awareness of the admission pool. As Tamara had mentioned on the last slide, she's been doing this for several years, but jumping into CBE by no means reduces the quality of that read. It's actually kind of giving us more access to more students in the pool. And so when we're looking at them in this initial CBE read or in the subsequent committees where terminal decisions are made, we have seen such a broader, quantity of the pool that it's helping inform, stronger decision making. It also helps reduce reader biases. And so for as much as, we don't want to admit it, everybody has a couple of biases behind them. I come from, a rural area. I was a cheerleader growing up. So you know what? Sometimes when I see those, they excite me. But, we always have to keep our biases tempered. And having that second staff member helps keep those things in check. So not only are we able to bring the institutional priorities and mission to the front of the conversation, we're also helping to keep each other in check as well about any biases. And so familiarity of candidates, again, we just have that broader awareness of the entire pool because, again, this is just the first step in the evaluation process for many of our applicants. And even in some of our recent admitted student events, I was checking students in and remember hearing names or checking students in that I wasn't the territory manager for, but I might have been the co-pilot for, or part of a further committee conversation as well. And so all of this just kind of leads up into stronger confidence in decision making. We have, two sets of eyes on an application at all time, and then in subsequent conversation, there's even more sets of eyes. And so we're continually providing that constant training, that broader awareness of the admission pool, and that just helps us feel much more confident in those terminal decisions that we're making throughout the process. Now, when this was being done at Penn, there was actually some college counselors that provided some reflections on what they observed or what they learned about CBE. And we wanted to share some of those from one of the counselors who, you can see here some of does CBE change what we do? And that's from the counselor perspective. So that's not from the admission staff perspective. And so some of the feedback that she gave, yes, they are reading the application. We're not just kind of flipping through the pages very quickly and coming up, making up our mind and then moving on to the next. It is a faster evaluation, but it was never a slow evaluation to begin with. As I mentioned in the beginning, a singular person might be spending 15 to 20 minutes on a file before passing it along to the next reader in the process. But when two readers are reading it together, it helps cut down on that time, even though you're still getting the same amount of man hours out of it, or man minutes out of it at the end of the day. We are still looking for the same qualities in your students. We're not looking for anything different. We're just getting to the information that they're sharing in a much more efficient way. And as counselors, you should continue to provide thoughtful and supporting materials for our student or for your students. And in one of the subsequent slides here, we'll talk about some takeaways. But just keep in mind to put your strongest pitch up front in a recommendation, whether you are a school counselor or a part of a CBO. Really drive that home, kind of up front. Make the information kind of easy to read, whether it's curricular in your school profile. I can't emphasize how much time we spend on a school profile or how many times we go back to that school profile just to ensure that we're completely familiar with the school, no matter how long we've been a territory manager or not. Schools often change things, and so even if we've been reading the same school, the past 10 or 15 years, every year we're checking up on it to make sure that there haven't been any changes. So make sure that it's easy to find. There's relevant contextual information both in the profile and within the letter that is supporting the student. Of course, you want to recognize that issue of fit or match to a program or a major or an institution does play a significant role. And so some of the things that I talked about in the beginning of the presentation, for example, for Rice University specifically, students who want maybe a smaller student body with that emphasis on more individualized attention, wanting that hands-on experience. Rice doesn't offer Greek life here, so if that's something that's important to a student, just really recognizing what the match for a program or a school and how that still continues to play a role through CBE and in the more traditional reading models. And then just making sure that you help students organize their application materials effectively. They have essays to write, short answer questions to write, lists of activities to submit. And so just making sure that they're being, thorough. This is one of those times where they should tell us absolutely, everything they can, but perhaps in a concise nature, and that's not always a natural thing for them. So working with students to make sure that they're organizing all of the materials effectively as possible, so that when the counselors and the admission staff are opening up a file, that we can pretty easily see that information.
Okay, so building off of the information that, or the counselor reflections, we wanted to sort of take that and also some of our own reflections and give you a few takeaways. So I would say, again, this is this is definitely still a process where we certainly have to make sure that students are academically prepared, but the reality of our process is we're still going to be seeing students where the majority of them can be successful, productive, and grow here as an institution and as a person, and help us to grow as well. So I think what is very important is that the students encourage the students to see each question as an opportunity to share their authentic story. We have even been very thoughtful. I mean, one of the things that we did after our first year of CBE usage was to look very carefully at the questions we were asking. I think very often, I hope you're familiar with the fact that, yes, we use the Common application, we use the Coalition application. We also will have some students who utilize the QuestBridge application, and we build a specific supplement, user supplement based on the context of the application. So there's an appropriate supplement, and we very carefully thought about the questions that we're asking in there to help hopefully lead a student to give us the information. I think that's going to help them to shine in the CBE process, but also give us the information that we need to be able to add to that story. The quantity of activities is not synonymous with the level of impact the student has had. And I think you try to tell them that. I would just say continue that message. It's not about them having to fill up all of the boxes with information. I mean, we're really trying to gauge where has the student had the greatest impact outside of class. And so if that's in a few things, make sure, again, that they're putting those things up front, that we're really getting a sense of how much time they're using. And they may have some time-intensive activities. We just want to make sure that we're seeing those as quickly as possible and getting a sense of how that student has progressed in that activity. And to kind of build off of that, make sure that we're not guessing at what a particular activity is, that there is some room for the student to provide some clarity. So we do really want to have that clarity on what it is that they've done. And that only means that they're filling out 2, 3 activities. That's just fine. In terms of your recommendation, make sure that your recommendation, certainly you can you can put in what you feel that you need to, but really make sure that you get to the heart of the student's intellectual vitality and impact. Because a lot of times, especially if we're talking about access, students may or may not know what they should be promoting. You may tell them, but this is also your opportunity to sort of, again, with that alignment, to reinforce certain messages about how that student has impacted your community and how you see their possibilities of impacting the college community, and how you can see that we might be able, based on your knowledge, how we might be able to impact them. If there's any inconsistencies, it's very, very vital in this process, because we are trying to take in a lot of information, maybe a shortened period of time, is that if there's any inconsistencies, address them head on. If there are periods where this student's performance didn't measure up to the majority of the rest of their performance, let's not guess at that. Help your students to address it, and with as much as you feel comfortable, and as much permission as the student has given you, you can address that. And this is where maybe the last bullet also comes into play, is that we do recommend and we encourage any input from CBOs. There are some CBOs that already have a process in which they will submit a letter of recommendation, or at least a letter of context for the students with whom they've worked. And in the application, we already, in the application, there are places where often the student can indicate if they've been working with the CBO. So we may already have that awareness, but often the CBO is going to have a different way that they may know the student, and they may have some information that doesn't, override anything the counselor has to say, but actually accents or adds to our evaluation. So we definitely would encourage that. All right, and before we get to the open it up for questions period, we just wanted to, just sort of underscore, because this is through the College Greenlight platform, and many of you are here because you work with students that may be that may need your additional resources or additional support. So I wanted to we just wanted to make sure that you are aware of some of the things that we have in place to make sure that students get as familiar with rights as possible, so that they are able to write those good applications and have a better sense of why rights would be their right match. So we do, and we have recently looked at our practices in recruitment and making sure that we include CBOs in our recruitment trips, and also that we look at the type of schools that we are visiting, and making sure that we're visiting schools with a variety of different profiles. So making sure that we're visiting schools where we may not have a presence, where that we feel like there's talent there, but we just haven't necessarily gotten the right awareness. So we're trying to diversify our recruitment trips. And when you receive this, it will be in a format where some of the things that you can see are underscored. Those are going to be hyperlinks. And so if you want to kind of get a sense of who your territory manager is for us, you can click on that, and it's going to be able to show you who that is. We have some programs that are for students that facilitate, perhaps, especially those students who would not have the resource to see the Rice campus without a little bit of assistance. We have our programs called SOAR and Vision. So SOAR is a travel grant program that does require an additional application because it happens in advance of the application process, so that happens in the fall. We're getting prepared to get all of that into place. So hopefully we'll be able to have that information up on the Greenlight platform soon, or you may be getting a direct mail email from us about the program if you're already in our databases of contacts. And also Vision is our program for the early sort of, I guess it's more of the late winter, early spring, typically takes place in February, and that is for students who've applied for admission. And we may be seeing some indicators that we would love for them to find out more about Rice. Maybe they still haven't visited the campus, and then that would be another opportunity for us to pay for them. We are a QuestBridge partner. We're actually one of the founding partners with QuestBridge, and so we have, over the years, definitely been proud and a proud sponsor to bring in so many students under the QuestBridge window. This coming year, we will be welcoming 55 new QuestBridge scholars, but in addition, we'll probably welcome somewhere in the order of 25 to 30 students who went through the QuestBridge process and just, they did not get matched as a scholar, but they were part of the process and are coming to Rice anyway. Our representatives will be at all 3 QuestBridge conferences this year. And there is an educator component at those conferences. So if you're not familiar with that, I encourage you to look into that as an opportunity. The programming is free. You do have to provide your own transportation to get to the program, but if it's in your area, it might be a great way to reinforce that knowledge. We have online chats and admission blogs for students so they can hear firsthand from students, and we try to make sure that we have some diverse profiles on there. And in terms of support for your students once they are at Rice, once they've committed to Rice, we have an area called Student Success Initiatives. And as part of Student Success Initiatives, we have several different support programs. One is our first year program. And so that is an area that really looks at making sure that the whole first year of a student's experience is seen as time of transition. And so that would be looking at everything that they need to provide in terms of that support for all students, but especially for our students who may need a little bit of shoring up. And that also might come in the form of our Rice Emerging Scholars Program. For some of our students who are entering a STEM with a STEM interest, we may invite them for a 6-week paid program where they get a chance to sort of get a boot camp on getting their math and science skills up to speed. And then we do have a very specific area of first-generation low-income programs, and that we have advisors within that area who will provide a very strong support for students and kind of really make sure that they're getting all of what they need to make a successful transition to Rice. So with that, I think we're at the point where we would like to open up the floor for discussion. So I think that at this point, Brittany's going to rejoin us, and she's going to moderate the discussion.
All right. Our first question that we have is, how much are counselor letters of recommendation weighted versus teacher recommendations, or just in general recommendations from adults who may know the student better? Oh, Taren, I think you are still on mute.
Yes, thank you. I would say that they're all kind of equally valuable because they're oftentimes shedding light on different perspectives of a student. So for example, the counselor recommendation might be talking more about the student within the full context of the school or in the class. They might be providing more personalized information for the students. But then the teacher recommendations, they're likely going to be shedding more light on the talents within that particular class, within that particular subject matter, how they perform in the classroom. And so that's going to be different than what the counselors are saying. And then if we have any other supplemental recs, maybe from a CBO or some type of religious leader, a supervisor at a part-time job, again, they're shedding light on other aspects of the student that the teacher or the counselor wouldn't necessarily have some of the experience with. So at the end of the day, our requirement specific to Rice is 1 counselor and 2 teachers, but we welcome the additional recs as well. And as long as they're continuing to shed light on different aspects of the student, then they're all, very valuable to us.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. We have two questions that are very similar. If CBE is the first stage, what are the next ones? And the second question, at what stage do you craft the class? And do you still hold committee meetings?
Yes, actually, so yes, pretty much once we get beyond the initial sort of team read, everything that happens after that would probably be something that looks like a traditional committee. But we may have different types of committees. So in essence, there are some students for whom it's almost a clear, it's in terms of our knowledge of what we've done in the past, in terms of admission, in terms of qualities of the students. There are some students that are probably closer to that point where we're ready to commit to a spot, but we also need to, be judicious because we don't know how many students are going to end up in sort of that area. So there's some students that are going to go straight to what we consider a traditional committee. And then there's some students that might go to something that we're going to see maybe students who have a mixed vote between readers. Like both readers don't necessarily agree that this is the strongest student in the pool, but at least one of them is saying, this is someone really worthy of additional conversation. So there will be some context around that to see how many of those students then sort of move up into that final committee stage. And so eventually we're going to get to that point where everybody there really has some real level of really, truly positive read on them. And then at that point, we may be looking at trying to shape different divisions of study. So then we're going to look at, so our engineers, our natural sciences together. We're going to look at our humanities and social sciences together. We also have our professional schools of music and architecture. So we are going to want to look at all of the students with those particular interests kind of together to see who stands out at that point. Once we get to that point. And so, we're typically trying to bring in a class where everybody has someone in class. But we're also then looking at geography. We're looking at ethnicity. We're looking at, we're not necessarily looking directly at gender, but we may have some sensitivity towards certain underrepresented areas like women in STEM or specifically women in engineering, or men who want to study some aspects of the humanities. So there might be some sensitivity at that point. So yes, at that level, then we start trying to think about, okay, given the number of spaces that we have, who are the best students that sort of fit a variety of institutional priorities, a variety of sort of areas where we'd like to see more of within the school. And so then we start making decisions based on those ideas. And yes, that will happen sort of in a traditional committee format, but again, with multiple people looking at the file at the same time.
Perfect. We have a question from Mark Stucker. I have heard from everyone who uses CBE that it saves time for readers without reducing quality. But if each reader spends 8 minutes before one reader who spent 16 minutes, that seems like a wash. So his question is, does the time savings come from the fact that there are more denials up front with 2 readers, so less students are brought before committee? Or are we saving time based on the write-up in typing notes? Can you please elaborate?
I'll let Taren go first, but I think we both might have perspectives on that. So
a lot of the time saving, we're still spending kind of 16 minutes on a file, but you're doing 8 for a co-pilot and 8 for a pilot, for example. And so it's just combined man minutes now that gets us to the 8 minutes, but we're each spending the same amount of time on the separate pieces of the application. So I might be spending 8 minutes in the pilot role looking at the the transcript and the recommendations. Tamara would be spending her time on the supplemental information and everything else, and the entire time we're having a conversation, but we're still able to get through the file that much faster because I don't now have to go to the information that Tamara's already seen, or Tamara doesn't have to look at what I've seen, because we're having that dialogue the entire time.
And I think one of the interesting things about our approach to CBE is that, okay, so you're the territory manager, you're the pilot in the first iteration, but then eventually, if the file is strong enough, when you get to the committee date, you kind of switch roles. So the person sort of in charge of committee now then looks at the academic information, and you get to look at the other softer pieces in the file that you didn't get to look in the first read. And so then you really do, as a territory manager, eventually get to see the whole file. But I think a lot of what I would sense in the old system was, for those readers who might be newer to the process, there was a level of hesitation. Like, they kind of knew the right decision, but they didn't really know it. I think sometimes we're able to have that quicker deliberation as a team, and we're able to validate each other very quickly and say, oh yeah, no, this looks great. Oh no, this is probably not going to make it. And so I think that there is, I'd say we've been, with our system, and because we have access to some great technology, I do believe we do take fewer notes because we've kind of isolated it to the things that we really need. But I think we still take very, very good notes that the whole idea is you facilitate the next step in the process. So what is it that you have to record to facilitate that next step? So I do think that we're more judicious with the notes that we're taking, but I also think that level of hesitancy and that confidence in decision making that we mentioned, I think that is what really kind of takes that time, that really sort of maximizes the time that we have together.
And to address sort of the part that was asked about, you know, the number of kind of denies up front, or the number that get passed along to committee, is that part of the time saving? And no. That's really not. I mean, the number that we see move forward using CBE compared to previous models has really maintained. It hasn't changed much. It's just allowing us to kind of get that initial evaluation of the application done a bit faster, so then we can spend even more time in those further committee phases.
Yeah, I would argue that committee actually we spend more time in committee now than we did with our old process. And so while we're faster on the read, we're taking more time to make some very deliberate, measured decisions.
Thank you. Okay, we have a question. For locum students in districts with no AP exams or proper SAT test prepping, does it look bad if they don't have scores, or if they score low because of these barriers?
Well, okay. First of all, let's talk a little bit about training, because we do use a number of different we use data, a lot of data in our process, and we will look at sort of what we would call sort of the environment of the student who's taking the exams, who has those access points. But if your school doesn't offer AP exams and does not facilitate that, that's a great thing to mention in either the profile or in the council recommendation, because we don't want to expect something that's not available for the students. Also, but again, that's that taking in data. That's the importance of that territory manager being part of that file, because once they see that is true of a school, if they see multiple applicants from the school, they don't have to spend any time guessing at, oh, okay, let me go back to the profile and figure out if this has, it's like, no, I already know this school doesn't, we're not looking for something, and it's not a requirement. We didn't say that they absolutely had to take AP exams. As long as we don't make it a requirement, we're certainly not going to have it as an expectation. If it's in there, it's data that we can use. And certainly if it's not going to be something that, even if the student wanted to do it, would be available to them, that's definitely something we need to know. But we also will look at data that's provided by the College Board, that's provided by ACT. We spend time talking about what it is that impacts a student's ability to do well on those tests. And we sit there and we talk about, there's a direct corollary between income and scoring on the test. There's a direct corollary between educational attainment in the home and scoring on those tests. Those are environmental things that we want to make sure that we always give our officers that context before they go into the reading process. So that's been a part of our training for years, and it's definitely, as we have aspirations to make sure that we're making our institution more accessible to students from a variety of means. Our point is that not everybody has to score at a certain level to say that they are qualified to be at our institution. And I think we try to sort of walk that talk in terms of the training process.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to do a couple of easy questions, quick questions. Does Rice offer a fly-in program?
For students or for counselors?
Let's say both.
Well, yes, we do. Well, the Vision and the SOAR programs are for students. I'll let Taren answer the other one.
Well, right now we formally don't have a regular fly-in program for counselors. It is something that we very much want to build, but right now it's very there's one particular program on campus that does bring in some counselors that are very specifically interested in that particular program, but the Office of Admission itself doesn't have a broader fly-in program. But please sit tight on that. We're really trying to work towards that because we'd love to fill that gap.
But I will say that and we know that, but if a family vacation or you find yourself in the Houston area and you want to come by, we will come on by. We'll facilitate an opportunity for you to have a campus tour. We'll facilitate some time with either, if they are available, with your territory manager or with somebody who can sit down and have a few moments of conversation with you. We probably can even afford a cup of coffee to give you that.
Okay, our next question. If financial aid is separate, how would you know to read a low-income student with a different lens?
Well, the financial aid process is separate, but not necessarily the context of a student being from a low-income background. So, we have parental information there. We also will often have, information from the student that they're coming from a low-income background, information from the counselor that is true. There's a direct question on the application that asks, are you asking for financial aid? There is also a question that asks, are you a first-generation student? So, those questions are in the application. It's just that we just want to be clear that the CDE read does not facilitate the awarding of aid, if you will.
Mm-hmm. And there's even questions like, are you eligible for low and income, free and reduced lunches and those kinds of things. So there's different cues we can pick up on, certainly.
Okay, perfect. I have another question. I have heard others say that before CBE, only the territory manager will have a say. But now with CBE, 2 people have input. But schools like Rice have consistently said before CBE was implemented that every file had at least 2 readers. Can you please reconcile these 2 statements?
Well, that was 2 readers. Well, no, I don't. I'm not sure. I said most files would have, in the old system, most files would have 2 readers. But I think there are plenty of times where in the old system, if the indicators weren't there, no one person can admit a file. It's like that. But in the old system, one person could have denied a file. And so this is actually changing that dynamic in that 2 people would actually have to sign off on a file that you're not choosing to move forward. but I would say, but is akin to the old system in that, yes, if you're moving a file forward, there's never been a time where one person can say, yes, the student isn't admitted. So that, at least that's specific to us. I'm sorry, I might have lost the full context of the question. So, Taren, do you remember what the full context was? So yeah, so again, and also again that was never two people in the same room. That was like, there was a first person who read, the territory manager read the file, and then the second person would come after, and it's like, so they would get whatever the territory manager passed on to them. So there might have been a few files that person didn't pass on to them, so that second person never saw all of the files that may have been sort of assigned to them as a second reader. So this is different in that at all times there's going to be two people in that initial review process, and so I think that again allows that level of experience to always, a certain level of experience to always be in the room.
And also keep in mind that there's different flavors of CVE, and there's different flavors of that Reader 1, Reader 2 model. And so maybe at some schools, if they still have that Reader 1, Reader 2 model, they are guaranteeing that, a file isn't, being denied until after that second read. But at some schools, that's not the case, that they have that capability to say, okay, this file isn't going to move on after the first read. And even with CVE, the way that we're approaching it, we all have the same kind of approach with that two-reader model, but sometimes certain schools won't read maybe international files through CVE or other populations through CVE. So just keep that in mind, that we're not trying to make any blanket statements about what Reader 1, Reader 2 models look like, or CVE. So it might be different school to school.
Okay, team, we are at the top of the hour. If you all would allow one more question before we close. I have a couple of questions about, actually, I would say we had a ton of questions flow in, and we do apologize if we did not get a hold of all of the questions, but maybe that means we need to have a part 2. So our last question would be, we have 2 questions. Do you all still use seasonal readers? And how do those outside readers fit into the new process?
So this year for the first, so last year we did not, as we wanted to sort of get a hold of this, but this year we did. But the requirement was that they were local, and that they were brought in for training, and that it was still happening in real time. I do know that there might be some people who even see this as an opportunity. I mean, as long as the reader would have access to a computer and have access, they could still do the CD model, but they would facilitate it in a virtual way. But for us, we found it, we wanted that to be for the sort of consistency of that immediate conversation and making sure that everyone was present in the room, as opposed to, if you're at home, we're not sure that you're still looking at the file in the same way. But yes, we did utilize people, but they had to be local and they had to be willing to come into the office.
Okay, thank you, team. So we're going to go ahead and close out, but I would like to just preface to all of our counselors that Tamara and Taren will receive a copy of all the questions that you all asked. And these are very valuable questions, and we do appreciate you for taking the time out to write them. So they will not be unseen, and we do appreciate all of your input. So with that being said, let me go ahead and close out. College Greenlight, we still have our online tools. Many of your are juniors or rising seniors are going through the college list building process. We would love for you all to bring your students to College Greenlight to find colleges who really match their academic, financial, and social needs, and meet colleges like Rice University, who is recruiting students for admissions and also informing students about different access and diversity admission programs that they offer on their campus. So students will learn about different summer programs, college fly-in, all the way to diversity days. So please, if you need any assistance, please contact us at info@collegegreenlight.com or just type "I'm interested" in the chat box. Okay, without further ado, Tamara, Taren, do you all have any parting words?
No, this has been a great experience today and clearly needed. I think certainly any of our territory managers can certainly follow up with any questions that you may have. And again, those links, when you get them, don't feel free to reach out to us if you didn't get a question answered today.